Blood trickled down Sarah Reeves' temple as she stood on the auction platform, her hands bound tightly behind her back. The merciless Montana sun beat down upon the dusty town of Snake River in the summer of 1878, the heat as oppressive as the leering gazes of the men gathered before her. She had arrived in town just 3 days prior with dreams of a teaching position, only to be ambushed by outlaws who'd beaten her, stolen her meager possessions, and delivered her to this hellish fate. "Next up, we got ourselves a fine lady specimen," bellowed the auctioneer, a portly man with yellowed teeth and breath that reeked of cheap whiskey. "Bit roughed up, but nothing that won't heal. Educated too, can read and write, starting bid at $50. Sarah fought against the wave of dizziness threatening to overcome her. The gash on her forehead still seeped blood that ran down her cheek, but it was the shame burning in her chest that hurt far worse. 22 years of life had not prepared her for such degradation. 55. Called a voice from the crowd. 60, shouted another. The bidding continued, each amount tearing another piece from Sarah's dignity. She closed her eyes, unable to look at the men who saw her as nothing more than property to be purchased. Her parents had raised her in Boston with every advantage, never imagining she would end up here after answering that advertisement for a schoolteacher position in Montana Territory. 120. The final bid came from a gray-haired man whose bulging belly strained against a soiled waistcoat. His eyes raked over Sarah with undisguised hunger. Going once. The auctioneer started. Sarah's legs trembled beneath her tattered skirt. She would rather die than be handed over to that man. Going twice. $500. The crowd fell silent, parting to reveal a tall figure at the back. The man stepped forward, sunlight glinting off the silver star pinned to his leather vest. He moved with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to command, his features partially obscured by the brim of his hat. "I said 500, he repeated, his voice deep and unwavering, "and she's mine to protect." The auctioneer's eyes widened at the astronomical sum. "Sold." To Marshal Preston Abernathy. Sarah felt her consciousness slipping as the marshal ascended the platform. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her were a pair of concerned blue eyes beneath the shadow of his hat brim. When Sarah awoke, she found herself on a narrow bed in an unfamiliar room. Sunlight streamed through faded curtains, illuminating simple but clean furnishings. She tried to sit up but gasped at the pain in her head. "Easy now," came a woman's gentle voice. "You've had quite an ordeal." An older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a bun approached the bedside, carrying a basin of water. "I'm Martha Wilson, the doctor's wife. You're safe now." Sarah's hand flew to her forehead, finding it bandaged. "The auction." She began, the memories flooding back with horrifying clarity. "Is over," Martha assured her. "Marshal Abernathy brought you here straight away. My husband tended to your wounds while you were unconscious." "Marshal Abernathy," Sarah repeated, recalling the commanding voice that had claimed her at the auction. "He purchased me." Martha's expression softened with understanding. "Not in the way you're thinking, dear. He put a stop to that illegal auction. Those responsible have been arrested. The marshal paid that money to get you away from there, not to own you." Sarah sank back against the pillows, relief washing over her. "But why would he spend so much? He doesn't even know me." "That's something you'll have to ask him yourself," Martha replied, wringing out a cloth and gently dabbing at Sarah's face. "He said he'd return this evening to check on you." The door opened, and an elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose entered. "Ah, our patient is awake. Excellent." Dr. Wilson approached, his manner kind but professional as he examined the wound on Sarah's head. "The cut isn't too deep, thankfully. You'll have a headache for a few days, but with proper rest, you should recover nicely." "Thank you, doctor," Sarah murmured. "You're fortunate the marshal was in town," Dr. Wilson remarked. "Those auctions are supposed to be for livestock and property, not human beings. But out here in the territories, law can be flexible." "You mean this has happened before?" Sarah asked, appalled. The doctor and his wife exchanged glances. "The West is still wild in many ways," Martha said diplomatically. "But Preston Marshal Abernathy, he's been working to bring proper justice to Snake River since he arrived last year." After the doctor finished his examination, Martha helped Sarah wash up and provided a clean dress. Though it was slightly too large, Sarah was grateful to be rid of her torn and bloodied garments. As promised, just as the sun began to set, there was a knock at the door. Martha opened it to reveal the tall figure Sarah remembered from the auction platform. Without his hat, Marshal Preston Abernathy appeared younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was tanned from the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. The silver star on his vest caught the lamplight as he stepped inside. "Evening, Martha," he greeted, then his gaze found Sarah sitting up in bed. His blue eyes widened slightly. "Miss Reeves, good to see you awake." "Marshal," Sarah acknowledged, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "I understand I have you to thank for my rescue." Preston removed his hat, holding it in his hands. "No thanks necessary, madam. What happened today shouldn't have occurred in the first place. Snake River's trying to be a respectable town." "Nevertheless," Sarah insisted, "you spent a considerable sum. I have no way to repay you immediately, but I assure you I will honor the debt." A flash of something irritation perhaps crossed his features. "There's no debt, Miss Reeves. That money came from the town's law enforcement fund. It'll be returned once the trial's concluded." Martha Wilson cleared her throat. "I'll leave you two to talk," she said, slipping out of the room. In the awkward silence that followed, Preston shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Doc says you'll recover well enough." "Yes, thanks to your intervention." Sarah hesitated, then asked, "How did you know my name, found your carpetbag at the livery?" "Man there said you'd arrived on Tuesday's stage, asking about a teaching position." Preston's jaw tightened. "Then you disappeared. I was investigating when I heard about the auction." Sarah clutched the blanket covering her legs. "I had a letter from the town council offering employment. When I arrived, a man claiming to represent them offered to escort me to my lodgings. Instead, he and his companions—" Her voice faltered. "Jack Hollister and his gang," Preston supplied, his expression darkening. "They've been causing trouble up and down the territory. We caught them all at the auction. They won't hurt anyone else." "And the teaching position," Preston's face softened slightly. "It's real enough. Town's been looking for a schoolteacher since Miss Jenkins married and moved east last spring." Sarah felt a spark of hope ignite in her chest. "Then I might still have employment. Mayor Graham will want to meet with you once you're recovered. But yes, the position remains open." Preston hesitated. "In the meantime, you'll need somewhere to stay. Martha mentioned the boarding house has a room available." I'm afraid those men took everything I had," Sarah admitted, shame coloring her cheeks. "My money, my letters of reference, all gone. We recovered some items when we arrested them. I'll have them brought over tomorrow." Preston shifted his hat in his hands. "As for your other concerns, the town can advance you a month's salary once you're officially hired. Until then, your room and board are covered." Sarah looked up sharply. "By whom?" "The town," Preston said firmly, though something in his expression made Sarah wonder if he was being entirely truthful. Before she could question him further, Dr. Wilson returned. "I think that's enough excitement for tonight," he announced. "Miss Reeves needs rest." Preston nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll check in tomorrow, Miss Reeves." He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers about the stoic lawman who had claimed her at auction. The next morning, Sarah awoke feeling stronger. Martha helped her dress and served her a hearty breakfast, chattering about the town as she did. "Snake River's growing fast," she explained. "The silver mine up in the hills brought the first wave, but now we have families settling too. That's why we need a proper school." "How many children would I be teaching?" Sarah asked, grateful for the distraction from her ordeal. "About 20, ranging from 6 to 14. The town council converted the old meeting hall into a schoolhouse last year." Martha poured coffee for them both. "It's respectable work for a single woman." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Martha opened it to reveal a young man in his late teens, clutching a familiar carpetbag. "Deputy Mills," Martha greeted. "Come in." The gangly deputy entered, removing his hat. "Madam, Marshal sent me with Miss Reeves' belongings." He carefully set the carpetbag down. "He also asked me to escort you to the mayor's office whenever you're feeling up to it. No rush," he added hastily. "Thank you, Deputy," Sarah said. "I would like to speak with the mayor today, if possible." After the deputy departed, Sarah opened her carpetbag with trembling fingers. Most of her clothing remained, though her money and some personal items were indeed missing. At the bottom, she found her teaching certificate and a single letter of reference. Not all had been lost. An hour later, Deputy Mills escorted Sarah down Snake River's Main Street. Despite her ordeal, she couldn't help noting how the frontier town seemed to be striving for respectability. Wooden boardwalks lined the street, and several buildings sported fresh paint. People nodded politely as they passed, though Sarah noticed curious glances and whispered conversations trailing in their wake. Mayor Graham proved to be a portly, enthusiastic man with mutton chop whiskers and an expansive manner. "Miss Reeves," he boomed, rising from behind his desk. "Terrible business. What happened to you? Simply terrible. But we're delighted you're still interested in our teaching position." The interview proceeded smoothly, with Mayor Graham asking about Sarah's education and teaching experience. She presented her surviving credentials, which he barely glanced at before declaring her perfectly qualified. "The school term begins in 3 weeks, he explained. "That should give you time to recover and prepare. The position pays $40 monthly, with room and board at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house included." "That's most generous," Sarah replied, relieved at the thought of steady employment and a place to stay. "Not at all. Education is the cornerstone of civilization," the mayor declared grandly. "Marshal Abernathy has been most insistent that we provide proper schooling. Says an educated populace is less likely to break the law," he chuckled. "Speaking of our good Marshal, he's arranged for your first month's salary in advance." Sarah stiffened. "I was told the town would advance my salary." "Well, yes. Technically, the funds come from the town, but it was the Marshal's idea." Mayor Graham seemed oblivious to her discomfort. "He's also arranged for you to stay at Dr. Wilson's until you're fully recovered, then you'll move to the boarding house." Sarah maintained her composure through the remainder of the meeting, but as Deputy Mills escorted her back to the doctor's home, her thoughts whirled. Why was Marshal Abernathy taking such a personal interest in her welfare? Was it merely his sense of duty, or something else? She had her opportunity to ask that very evening when Preston Abernathy arrived at the Wilson residence just as they were finishing supper. "Marshal," Dr. Wilson greeted. "Join us for coffee." "Much obliged, Doc," Preston replied, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. His gaze found Sarah, who sat stiffly in her chair. "Miss Reeves, how are you feeling today?" "Much improved, thank you," she answered coolly. "I had a productive meeting with Mayor Graham. Glad to hear it." Preston accepted a cup of coffee from Martha. "The school needs someone like you." After some polite conversation, Martha tactfully suggested that her husband help her with something in the kitchen, leaving Sarah alone with the marshal. "Mr. Abernathy," Sarah began once they were alone, "I understand you've taken certain liberties regarding my situation." Preston's cup paused halfway to his lips. "Pardon, arranging my accommodations, advancing my salary." Sarah met his gaze directly. "While I appreciate the assistance, I don't require charity, nor do I wish to be indebted to you personally." Preston set his cup down with deliberate care. "Miss Reeves, I assure you my actions were in an official capacity as marshal." "Then why does it seem the mayor believes otherwise?" Sarah challenged. A muscle twitched in Preston's jaw. "Graham talks too much," he muttered. Then louder. "What happened to you was a failure of this town's security, my failure. Making things right isn't charity, it's justice." "Justice would have been preventing the auction entirely," Sarah pointed out. "Yes," Preston agreed, surprising her with his candor. "It would have been." "I'm sorry I didn't." The simple apology deflated some of Sarah's indignation. "Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice softer now. "Claim me at the auction that way. You could have simply arrested everyone." Preston's blue eyes held hers. "In that moment, stopping the sale was the fastest way to ensure your safety. Those men would have fought back and you were already injured." Sarah hadn't considered that perspective. "I see." "Miss Reeves," Preston continued, "I understand your pride. But out here, survival sometimes means accepting help when it's offered. Even from strangers." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "We're hardly strangers now." Before Sarah could respond, the Wilsons returned, ending their private conversation. Preston departed soon after, leaving Sarah with much to contemplate about the complicated marshal who had rescued her. Over the next few days, Sarah's strength returned rapidly. Dr. Wilson pronounced her well enough to move to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house by the end of the week. While Martha Wilson had been warm and motherly, Sarah looked forward to establishing her independence in Snake River. The day before her planned relocation, Sarah decided to venture into town alone. She needed to familiarize herself with Snake River if she was to make it her home, and she refused to let fear keep her confined. The general store was her first destination. As she examined bolts of fabric, considering a new dress for teaching, the bell above the door jingled. Sarah glanced up to see Preston entering, accompanied by a small girl of perhaps 7 or 8 years. "But why can't I have peppermint sticks today?" the child was asking, her hand tucked trustingly in Preston's larger one. "Because," Preston explained patiently, "you already had 3 yesterday when Mrs. Cooper wasn't looking." "How did you know that?" the girl demanded, eyes wide. Preston tapped the silver star on his chest. "It's my job to know everything that happens in Snake River." The girl giggled, then spotted Sarah. "Who's that lady?" she asked, loudly enough for Sarah to hear. Preston looked up, surprise registering on his face when he saw Sarah. "Miss Reeves," he greeted, approaching with the child in tow. "I didn't expect to see you out and about so soon." "Doctor Wilson said fresh air would do me good," Sarah explained, finding herself oddly pleased by the encounter. "And who might this young lady be?" "This is Miss Emily Cooper," Preston introduced. "Emily, this is Miss Reeves, who's going to be your new teacher." Emily regarded Sarah with frank curiosity. "Do you know all your letters?" "Miss Jenkins did," Sarah smiled. "I do indeed, and numbers too." "Good," Emily declared, "because I want to learn division next." "Emily is staying with the Coopers while her father works their claim," Preston explained. "Mrs. Cooper helps me keep an eye on her." My pa's going to strike it rich, Emily informed Sarah seriously. Then we're going to build a big house with real glass windows. That sounds wonderful, Sarah replied, charmed by the girl's forthrightness. Mr. Barton, the storekeeper, approached. Marshal, that order of ammunition you were expecting just arrived. Thanks, Barton. Emily, why don't you look at those hair ribbons while I take care of business? Preston suggested. As Emily skipped away, Preston turned to Sarah. Doc says you're moving to the boarding house tomorrow. Yes. It's time I established myself properly in town. Sarah hesitated, then added, I want to thank you again for your assistance. I've been, perhaps unfairly suspicious of your motives. Preston's expression softened. No need for thanks. I'm just glad you're recovering well. He glanced toward Emily, who was examining ribbons with intense concentration. She's one of the reasons we need a proper school here. These children deserve better than what most frontier towns offer. You seem to care a great deal about her, Sarah observed. Emily. Her mother died on the journey west 2 years ago. Her father's a good man, but mining claims don't leave much time for raising a child. A shadow crossed Preston's face. Too many children out here grow up without proper guidance or education. Sarah was touched by his evident concern. You don't match my preconceptions of a frontier lawman, Marshal Abernathy. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Is that a compliment, Miss Reeves? I believe it is, she admitted. Their moment was interrupted when Emily returned, clutching a blue ribbon. Can I get this one, please? Preston examined it seriously. Well, I suppose one ribbon isn't the same as 3 peppermint sticks. As Preston paid for his purchases, and the ribbon, Sarah found herself studying him with new interest. The man who had claimed her at auction with such authority now showed gentle patience with a motherless child. There were clearly depths to Preston Abernathy that she had yet to fathom. That evening, as Sarah packed her few belongings in preparation for the move, Martha Wilson sat with her, offering advice about life in Snake River. Mrs. Holloway runs a respectable establishment, she assured Sarah. Mostly unmarried businessmen and the occasional visitor passing through. You'll be the only woman, but no one will bother you. Thank you for all your kindness, Sarah said sincerely. You and Dr. Wilson have been extraordinary. Martha waved away her thanks. It's what neighbors do out here. The West isn't like the East. We have to look after one another. She hesitated. I noticed Preston stopped by the store while you were there today. Sarah felt a flush rise to her cheeks. Yes, with young Emily Cooper. He takes a special interest in the children of Snake River, Martha noted, I think because of his own upbringing. Sarah's curiosity was piqued. What about his upbringing? Martha seemed to debate how much to share. Preston doesn't talk about it much, but he was orphaned young. Raised by various relatives, none particularly caring, he made his own way from a young age. She folded a blouse and handed it to Sarah. It's why he's so determined that the children here have opportunities he didn't. I had no idea, Sarah murmured, thinking of the gentle way Preston had treated Emily. He's a good man, Martha said simply. Better than most in these parts. Just a bit rough around the edges, like everything else out here. The next morning, Deputy Mills arrived with a wagon to transport Sarah's belongings to the boarding house. Mrs. Holloway proved to be a stern-faced widow with a brisk manner but kind eyes. Rules are simple, she explained, showing Sarah to a small but clean room on the second floor. No gentlemen callers in private rooms. Meals are at 7 noon and 6 sharp. Laundry day is Monday. It's perfect, Sarah assured her, already planning how to arrange her few possessions. Marshal Abernathy says you're to be our new schoolteacher, Mrs. Holloway remarked. About time. These children are running wild. I look forward to beginning classes, Sarah replied. Mayor Graham mentioned the school term starts in 3 weeks. Indeed. The schoolhouse needs a good cleaning before then. I'd be happy to show you around tomorrow if you'd like. Sarah spent her first day at the boarding house settling in and meeting the other residents, a clerk from the assayer's office, an elderly shopkeeper, and a young banker who blushed furiously whenever she addressed him directly. The following day, true to her word, Mrs. Holloway escorted Sarah to the schoolhouse. The converted meeting hall stood at the edge of town, a sturdy wooden structure with large windows and a small bell tower. "It's not fancy," Mrs. Holloway said as she unlocked the door, "but it's solid. Town council had proper desks made by the carpenter." Inside, rows of desks faced a larger desk and blackboard at the front of the room. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through the windows, and Sarah could see that a thorough cleaning was indeed necessary before classes began. "It's wonderful," she said sincerely. "A perfect place for learning." As they were examining the small bookshelf of donated texts, the door opened. Preston entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. "Ladies," he greeted. "Mrs. Holloway, I see you're giving Miss Reeves the tour." "Just showing her what needs doing before term starts," Mrs. Holloway confirmed. "Place needs a woman's touch." "I came to offer any assistance you might need," Preston said, addressing Sarah. "The town council has allocated funds for school supplies. Just make a list of what you require." "That's most kind," Sarah replied, noticing how the sunlight highlighted auburn strands in his dark hair. "I was concerned about the limited number of books. I've written to contacts in Helena about that. We should have more arriving before classes begin." Mrs. Holloway glanced between them with a knowing look. "I just remembered I promised Mrs. Barton I'd share my sourdough starter. You can show Miss Reeves the rest, Marshal." Before either could object, she bustled out the door. Left alone with Preston, Sarah became acutely aware of his presence. He seemed to fill the small schoolhouse with his quiet strength. "How are you settling in at the boarding house?" he asked, moving to open a window and release some of the stale air. "Very well, thank you. Mrs. Holloway runs an orderly establishment." "She does indeed. Been the backbone of this town since her husband passed." Preston ran a finger along a dusty shelf. "This place will need some work." "Nothing I can't manage," Sarah assured him. "I'm eager to begin making it suitable for students." Preston nodded, then seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "Miss Reeves, I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you to the Founders' Day celebration this Saturday." Sarah's heart gave an unexpected flutter. Founders' Day, it's become something of a tradition, marks the anniversary of Snake River's establishment. "There's a picnic in the afternoon, dancing in the evening." Preston's expression remained carefully neutral. "As the new school teacher, you should meet the families whose children you'll be teaching." "Is that your only reason for asking?" The bold question surprised even Sarah herself. A smile tugged at the corner of Preston's mouth. "No," he admitted, "it's not." Sarah found herself returning his smile. "Then I would be pleased to accept your escort, Marshal Preston," he corrected gently. "If we're to attend together, you might as well use my given name." "Preston," Sarah repeated, finding she liked the way it felt on her lips. "And you must call me Sarah." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition of mutual interest that transcended their initial meeting under such dire circumstances. As they walked back toward town together, discussing plans for the school, Sarah realized that Snake River might offer far more than just employment. It might offer a new beginning in ways she'd never anticipated. The days leading up to Founders' Day passed quickly, as Sarah immersed herself in preparations for the school term. Word of her presence spread through the community, and she found herself meeting many of her future pupils and their parents as they stopped by the schoolhouse to introduce themselves. Emily Cooper became a frequent visitor, often bringing her father, Samuel, a weathered but gentle man with calloused hands and a quiet manner. "Emily talks of nothing but starting school," he told Sarah. "It's good to have something besides the claim to focus on." Other children came too: the blacksmith's twin sons, the storekeeper's daughter, and a shy boy named Thomas, whose mother worked at the town's small hotel. Sarah welcomed them all, allowing them to help with small tasks as she cleaned and organized the schoolhouse. Preston stopped by regularly, sometimes bringing supplies, other times just checking on her progress. Their conversations flowed more easily now, and Sarah found herself looking forward to his visits. On Friday afternoon, as Sarah was writing out lesson plans at her desk, Preston arrived with a crate of books. "Special delivery from Helena," he announced, setting it down carefully. Sarah hurried to open it, gasping with delight at the array of primers, readers, and even a few volumes of poetry and history. "Preston, these are magnificent. How did you manage it?" "The territorial governor's wife is passionate about education," he explained. "When I wrote about our new school and teacher, she was happy to donate from her own collection." Sarah lifted a beautifully illustrated collection of Shakespeare's works. "The children will be so inspired by these." "It wasn't just for the children," Preston admitted, watching her leaf through the pages. "Something told me you might appreciate fine literature yourself." Sarah looked up, touched by his thoughtfulness. "You were right. In Boston, my father's library was my favorite place. I feared I might have to leave such pleasures behind in coming west." "The West isn't all dust and danger," Preston said softly. "There's beauty here too, if you know where to look." Their eyes met, and Sarah felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Preston took a step closer, then seemed to catch himself. He cleared his throat. "About tomorrow I'll call for you at 2 o'clock if that suits." "It suits perfectly," Sarah replied, wishing he hadn't stepped back. That night, Sarah lay awake in her narrow bed at the boarding house, her mind filled with thoughts of Preston Abernathy. In the short time since arriving in Snake River, she had gone from terror to tragedy to something else entirely. Something that made her pulse quicken whenever Preston entered a room. Was it merely gratitude for his rescue? Or something deeper forming between them? Tomorrow's celebration might provide answers, she thought, as sleep finally claimed her. Saturday dawned clear and warm. Sarah spent the morning helping Mrs. Holloway prepare dishes for the community picnic, then retreated to her room to dress for the occasion. She had splurged on fabric for a new dress, staying up late several nights to complete it. The blue calico complemented her eyes, and she'd styled her honey-brown hair in a more becoming fashion than her usual practical bun. At precisely 2 o'clock, Mrs. Holloway called up the stairs that the marshal had arrived. Sarah descended to find Preston waiting in the parlor, hat in hand, looking decidedly uncomfortable under Mrs. Holloway's watchful gaze. The sight of him momentarily stole Sarah's breath. Preston had traded his usual work clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly taken a razor to his usual stubble. "Miss Reeves," he greeted, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look very nice." "As do you, Marshal," she returned, enjoying his obvious appreciation. Mrs. Holloway harumphed. "Be sure to have her back at her respectable hour, Marshal." "Yes, madam," Preston agreed solemnly, though Sarah caught the hint of amusement in his eyes. The town square had been transformed for the celebration. Tables laden with food lined one side, while bunting and lanterns decorated the bandstand. Children raced about playing games, and nearly the entire population of Snake River and the surrounding homesteads seemed to be in attendance. Founders Day began as a small gathering 5 years ago, Preston explained as they walked among the festivities. Now it's become quite the event. It's wonderful, Sarah said, admiring the sense of community on display. In Boston, we had similar gatherings, but they were far more formal. I imagine everything's more formal back east, Preston remarked. Not everything, Sarah replied. Some things are universal, like children's delight in simple pleasures. She nodded toward a group of youngsters playing a game with hoops and sticks. Throughout the afternoon, Preston introduced Sarah to countless residents of Snake River. She met farmers, miners, shopkeepers, and their families, trying her best to remember names and faces of those whose children would soon be her pupils. Mayor Graham made a point of presenting her to everyone as our accomplished new schoolteacher from Boston, while his wife, a bird-like woman with keen eyes, assessed Sarah's relationship with Preston with barely concealed curiosity. "You've caused quite a stir, arriving with the marshal as your escort," Martha Wilson commented when they stopped at the refreshment table. "He's never brought anyone to a town function before." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "He's merely being neighborly, helping me become acquainted with the community." Martha's knowing smile suggested she believed otherwise, but she changed the subject graciously. "Have you met the Hendersons yet? Their oldest boy is quite bright. He'll be a challenge for you to keep engaged in lessons." As the afternoon transitioned to evening, lanterns were lit and musicians took their places on the bandstand. Couples began to gather for dancing as the first strains of a waltz filled the air. Preston, who had been speaking with the blacksmith, returned to Sarah's side. "Would you care to dance?" he asked, extending his hand. "I would," Sarah replied, placing her hand in his. Preston led her to the edge of the dancing area, his hand warm at her waist as they began to move with the music. Sarah had expected him to be stiff or awkward, but he guided her with surprising grace. "You dance very well," she remarked. A smile touched his lips. "Don't sound so surprised. Even lawmen have to learn some social graces." "Where did you learn?" "Somehow I can't imagine dancing lessons being part of martial training." Preston chuckled, the sound warming something deep in Sarah's chest. "My aunt insisted I learn when I was 16. Said no woman would have me if I couldn't manage a proper waltz." "A wise woman," Sarah teased. "She had her moments," Preston conceded. Then, more seriously, "She took me in after my parents died. Wasn't always easy for either of us, but she did her best." Sarah sensed there was more to that story, but the middle of a dance wasn't the place to pursue it. Instead, she allowed herself to enjoy the feeling of being in Preston's arms, moving in harmony as the music swelled around them. They danced 3 dances in succession before stepping aside to cool off. Preston fetched them cups of punch, and they found a relatively quiet spot near the edge of the square. "Having a good time?" Preston asked, his usual reserve softened by the festive atmosphere. "The best I've had in longer than I can remember," Sarah admitted. "Thank you for inviting me." "I should be thanking you for accepting," Preston replied. "Though I notice young Nathaniel from the bank has been watching us all evening. I think he hoped to claim a dance with you." Sarah laughed. "He can barely speak when I pass him on the stairs at the boarding house. I doubt he'd manage to ask me to dance." "Can't blame him for being tongue-tied around you," Preston said softly. Before Sarah could respond to this unexpected compliment, Emily Cooper came running up, her blue ribbon bouncing in her hair. "Miss Reeves, Marshal, Pa says I can stay for the first hour of dancing if you'll keep an eye on me." "Well, we can certainly do that," Sarah assured her. "In fact, would you like to learn a simple dance step?" Emily's face lit up. "Can I really? For the next few minutes, Sarah demonstrated a basic two-step while Preston watched with evident amusement. When Emily insisted he join them, he gamely allowed the child to stand on his boots as he guided her through the steps, making her giggle with delight. Sarah's heart swelled at the sight. This strong, serious man who commanded respect throughout the territory was completely at ease with a child's innocent demands. She was seeing yet another facet of Preston Abernathy and finding herself drawn to him all the more. As the evening progressed, Sarah danced with the mayor, Dr. Wilson, and several fathers of her future pupils, but her gaze continually sought Preston through the crowd. She found him watching her as often as she looked for him. When the musicians announced the final dance, Preston appeared at her side. "One more," he asked, extending his hand. The music was slower this time, allowing for conversation as they moved together beneath the starlit sky. "Did you always want to be a lawman?" Sarah asked, curious about the path that had led him to Snake River. Preston considered the question. "Not always. Thought I might try my hand at ranching once, but circumstances led me to a badge instead." "What circumstances?" He was quiet for a moment. "War has a way of changing a man's direction. After serving in the Union Army, I couldn't settle back into ordinary life, needed something with purpose." "You fought in the war." Sarah hadn't considered that possibility, though it made sense given his age. "Last 2 years of it, young and foolish, but I survived." His expression grew distant. "Afterward, I drifted west. Ended up deputy in a Colorado mining town. Found I had a knack for keeping order without unnecessary violence. A rare skill in these parts, from what I've heard." Preston's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Too many men with badges are just bullies with legal authority. I've always believed the law should protect people, not terrify them." "Like you protected me," Sarah said softly. Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Preston's gaze dropped briefly to her lips before returning to her eyes. "Sarah," he began, his voice low. The music ended abruptly, breaking the moment. Around them, couples separated and applause filled the air as the band was thanked for their performance. Preston escorted Sarah back to the boarding house as the celebration wound down. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager to end the evening. The streets of Snake River were quiet now, most residents still at the town square or already home for the night. "I hope you enjoyed your first Founder's Day," Preston said as they approached Mrs. Holloway's. "More than I can express," Sarah replied truthfully. "Everyone has been so welcoming." They reached the porch steps, and Sarah turned to face him. In the soft glow of the porch lamp, Preston's features seemed both stronger and gentler than in harsh daylight. "Thank you for today," she said, suddenly shy. "For everything, really, if not for you." Preston shook his head. "Don't think about that now." "I can't help it sometimes," Sarah admitted. "But today helped. Being part of something joyful, being accepted by the community, it's healing." Preston took her hand, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles. "You belong here now, Sarah. I hope you'll stay." The simple touch sent warmth spiraling through her. "I intend to," she whispered. For a breathless moment, Sarah thought Preston might kiss her. He leaned forward slightly, hesitating, then seemed to reconsider. Instead, he raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her fingers. "Good night, Sarah," he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Good night, Preston," she replied, her skin still tingling from his kiss as she went inside. Over the following weeks, as the school term approached, Sarah threw herself into preparations. The schoolhouse was thoroughly cleaned, materials organized, and lessons planned. Preston continued to visit regularly, sometimes bringing additional supplies, other times simply offering his company as she worked. Their relationship evolved with quiet certainty. He began escorting her to Sunday services. sharing meals at the boarding house when Mrs. Holloway invited him, with increasing frequency, and taking evening walks around Snake River when Sarah needed a break from lesson planning. During one such walk, just days before school was to begin, they strolled beyond the edge of town to a small rise overlooking Snake River Valley. The sunset painted the landscape in brilliant oranges and purples, the beauty taking Sarah's breath away. "I never imagined Montana would be so magnificent," she remarked as they sat on a fallen log. "When I decided to come west, I thought I was sacrificing beauty for opportunity." "What made you decide to leave Boston?" Preston asked. "Most people would consider teaching there far more prestigious than in a frontier town." Sarah watched an eagle soaring over the distant mountains. "After my parents died last year, there was little keeping me there. I taught at a ladies' seminary, but the position felt confining. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Montana Territory, something called to me. You're braver than most, making such a journey alone, or more foolish," Sarah said with a wry smile. "Given what happened upon my arrival." Preston's expression darkened. "I still regret that was your introduction to Snake River." "It wasn't all bad," Sarah said softly, meeting his gaze. "It brought us together after all." The air between them seemed to still. Preston reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "Sarah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. This time, when he leaned toward her, he didn't hesitate. His lips met hers in a tender kiss that sent Sarah's heart soaring. She responded instinctively, her hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since Founders Day," he admitted. "I've wanted you to," Sarah confessed, a smile blooming on her lips. Preston kissed her again, deeper this time, his arm encircling her waist to draw her closer. Sarah melted against him, all thoughts of propriety forgotten in the joy of being in his embrace. As the sun's last rays faded from the sky, they reluctantly separated. "We should head back," Preston said, though he made no move to release her hand. "Mrs. Holloway will have my badge if I keep you out after dark." Sarah laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "We wouldn't want that." "You wear that badge rather well." They walked back to town hand in hand, neither rushing to end their time together. At the boarding house steps, Preston kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling. "I'll see you tomorrow," he promised. "Sleep well, Sarah." "You too, Preston," she replied, certain she would dream of nothing but him. The school term began with 23 students ranging from 6 to 15 years of age. Sarah quickly established routines and expectations, finding most of the children eager to learn despite their varied backgrounds and abilities. Emily, Cooper, proved to be one of her brightest pupils, while young Thomas from the hotel revealed an unexpected talent for mathematics. Preston made it a habit to walk Sarah to and from the schoolhouse each day, using the excuse of ensuring public safety, though everyone in town could see it was the school teacher, not the public, who held his interest. 2 weeks into the term, as they walked toward the schoolhouse on a crisp Monday morning, Preston seemed unusually quiet. "Is something troubling you?" Sarah asked, concerned by his furrowed brow. Preston hesitated. "I received a telegram yesterday. There's been trouble at a mining camp north of here. The territorial governor has asked me to investigate." Sarah's heart sank. "You'll be leaving then, for a few days, a week at most." Preston stopped walking, turning to face her. "I've asked Deputy Mills to keep an eye on the school while I'm gone." "I'm sure we'll manage," Sarah assured him, though the thought of his absence left an unexpected hollow feeling in her chest. Preston took her hand. "I don't like leaving you." I'm hardly the woman you found bleeding at auction anymore, Sarah reminded him. I can take care of myself. I know you can, Preston said, a smile finally breaking through his serious expression. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Sarah Reeves. He kissed her then, not seeming to care who might see them standing in the middle of Main Street. When they parted, Sarah was slightly breathless. That should give Mrs. Holloway and her friends something to discuss while I'm away, Preston said with a hint of mischief. Sarah laughed. You're incorrigible, Marshal Abernathy, only where you're concerned. His expression grew serious again. I'll leave at dawn tomorrow. May I see you tonight? You know where to find me, Sarah replied softly. That evening, they sat together on the boarding house porch, speaking of inconsequential things and avoiding mention of his impending departure. As the night grew cooler, Sarah retrieved a shawl from inside, returning to find Preston staring thoughtfully into the darkness. Tell me what you're thinking, she requested, settling beside him again. Preston took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. I'm thinking about the future, he admitted, about what I want from life. And what do you want? Sarah asked, her heart beating faster. Things I never thought I'd want again. A home, family. His blue eyes found hers in the lamplight. Someone to share my life with. Sarah's breath caught. Preston. I'm not proposing, Sarah, not yet, he clarified quickly. That would be unfair before I leave. But I wanted you to know my intentions are honorable and permanent. Joy bloomed in Sarah's chest. I appreciate your honesty, and when you do propose properly, you should know my answer will be yes. The smile that spread across Preston's face was the most unguarded she'd ever seen from him. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her with such tenderness that tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. I'll come back to you, he promised against her lips. As quickly as I can. I'll be waiting, she whispered. The following morning, Sarah rose early to see Preston off. He looked every inch the lawman in his riding clothes, pistol at his hip and rifle secured to his saddle. Be careful, Sarah urged as he mounted his horse. Always am, Preston assured her. He leaned down from the saddle to kiss her once more. I love you, Sarah Reeves. The words, spoken for the first time, filled Sarah with warmth despite the early morning chill. And I love you, Preston Abernathy. Now go, so you can return to me sooner. With a final smile, Preston turned his horse and rode out of Snake River, the sunrise gilding his figure as he disappeared into the distance. The days of Preston's absence stretched longer than Sarah anticipated. She threw herself into teaching, expanding her lessons to include evening classes for adults who wanted to improve their reading skills. The activity kept her busy, but her nights were lonely, filled with worry for Preston's safety. A week passed with no word. Then another. The entire town seemed to feel the marshal's absence, none more keenly than Sarah. Deputy Mills did his best to maintain order, but he lacked Preston's natural authority. On the afternoon of the 12th day, Sarah was dismissing her students when she heard a commotion in the street. Looking out the schoolhouse window, she saw several riders approaching not Preston, but rough-looking men she didn't recognize. Children, she said calmly, though her heart had begun to race. I want you all to gather your things quickly and quietly. Emily Cooper looked up sharply. Is something wrong, Miss Reeves? Nothing to worry about, Sarah assured her, though the shouts now emanating from the direction of the marshal's office suggested otherwise. We're going to take the back way to the church. Pastor Miller is expecting us for a special lesson. It was a hasty lie, but it worked. Sarah hurried the children out the rear door of the schoolhouse, instructing the oldest boy to lead them directly to the church while she gathered some materials. As soon as they were safely away, Sarah rushed toward the commotion, fear for Preston driving her forward. The scene in front of the marshal's office froze her blood. 5 men on horseback surrounded Deputy Mills, who stood with his hands raised. One of the riders, a scar-faced man with a week's growth of beard, was shouting demands. "Where's Abernathy?" the man bellowed. "We know he came back to town." "Marshal's not here," Mills insisted, his young face pale but determined. "Been gone near 2 weeks now." The scarred man spat. "You're lying, boy. Our lookout saw him ride in not an hour ago." Sarah's heart leapt. Preston was back, but clearly in danger from these men who seemed intent on finding him. "Search the town," the leader ordered, gesturing to his companions. "Check the boarding house, the saloon, everywhere. I want Abernathy found before sundown." As the men dispersed, Sarah ducked into the alley between buildings, her mind racing. If Preston had indeed returned, where would he go? Not the marshal's office, obviously, if he'd seen these men arriving. The boarding house. Sarah realized. He might have gone there looking for her. Moving carefully to avoid being seen, Sarah made her way through back alleys toward Mrs. Holloway's. As she approached, she saw one of the riders dismounting in front, confirming her fears that they were searching everywhere. A hand suddenly gripped her arm, pulling her into the shadow of a storage shed. Sarah opened her mouth to scream, but a familiar voice whispered, "It's me." "Preston," she gasped, turning to find him looking haggard and dusty from the trail, but blessedly alive. "What's happening?" "Who are those men?" "Hollister's gang," Preston explained grimly. "The ones who tried to sell you. They escaped during transport to Helena." "But why come back here?" "Revenge," Preston said simply. "I tracked them to their hideout north of here. Things went bad. I killed Hollister's brother in the firefight. Now they want blood." Sarah clutched his arm. "The children, I sent them to the church, but good thinking. Pastor Miller will keep them safe." Preston peered around the corner of the shed. "I need to get these men out of town before someone gets hurt." "What can I do?" Sarah asked. Preston looked at her with surprise, then admiration. "No suggestions that I run or hide. Would you listen if I made them?" Sarah countered. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No." "Then tell me how I can help." Preston quickly outlined a plan. Sarah would make her way to Dr. Wilson's home, where Preston had already sent word to gather any men willing to fight. Meanwhile, Preston would create a distraction to draw Hollister's gang away from the populated areas of town. "Be careful," Sarah urged, gripping his hand. "You too," Preston replied, pressing a quick, fierce kiss to her lips before they separated. Sarah made it to the doctor's house without incident, finding it already filled with determined townsmen armed with whatever weapons they possessed. "Doctor." Wilson was organizing them into groups as she entered. "Miss Reeves," he exclaimed, "Preston said you'd be coming. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she assured him. "What's the plan?" "Half of us will position ourselves around the town square. The others will circle behind to cut off escape once Preston draws them in." The doctor handed her a small revolver. "Preston said you might need this." Sarah accepted the weapon, remembering the shooting lessons her father had insisted upon years ago. "Let's hope I don't," she said quietly. The next hour passed in tense preparation. Through the doctor's window, Sarah watched as Preston's plan unfolded. A gunshot from the direction of the livery stable drew the attention of Hollister's men, who converged on the location only to find it empty. As they searched in confusion, Preston appeared briefly on a rooftop before disappearing again, leading them on a deadly game of cat and mouse through the outskirts of Snake River. Sarah's heart was in her throat as she watched Preston narrowly evade capture multiple times. He was drawing the gang exactly where he wanted them, away from civilians, and toward the ambush the townsmen had prepared. Finally, as dusk approached, Hollister and his remaining men found themselves surrounded in the town square. Preston stepped out from behind the cover of a water trough, his rifle aimed steadily. "It's over, Hollister," he called. "Drop your weapons." The scarred man snarled, his hand hovering near his pistol. "You killed my brother, Abernathy." "Your brother died because he chose to shoot rather than surrender," Preston replied evenly. "Don't make the same mistake." For a moment, it seemed Hollister might comply. Then his face contorted with rage and he went for his gun. The square erupted in gunfire. Sarah watched in horror as Preston dove for cover, returning fire from behind a horse trough. Two of Hollister's men fell immediately, but the others found shelter behind wagons and water barrels. Unable to remain a passive observer, Sarah slipped out of the doctor's house and circled behind the general store, hoping to get a better view of Preston's position. As she peered around the corner, she saw one of Hollister's men creeping along the boardwalk, clearly intending to flank Preston. Without hesitation, Sarah raised the revolver and fired. Her shot went wide, but it was enough to alert Preston to the danger. He whirled and fired in one smooth motion, dropping the would-be ambusher. The brief distraction cost him, however. Hollister himself appeared from behind a wagon, taking aim at Preston's exposed position. "Preston!" Sarah screamed in warning. He rolled away just as Hollister fired, the bullet splintering the wood where Preston's head had been moments before. In the same motion, Preston came up on one knee and returned fire. His shot struck true, and Hollister staggered backward, a look of surprise on his face as he crumpled to the ground. The remaining outlaw, seeing his leader fall, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. In the sudden silence that followed, Sarah ran to Preston, heedless of the danger that might still lurk. He was climbing to his feet, wincing slightly as she reached him. "Are you hurt?" she demanded, her hands frantically checking him for wounds. "Just grazed," Preston assured her, though she could now see blood seeping through his sleeve. "What were you thinking, putting yourself in danger like that?" "I was thinking I wasn't going to watch the man I love die," Sarah retorted, relief making her bold. Preston's expression softened, and despite the chaos around them, he pulled her into his arms. "I told you I'd come back to you," he murmured against her hair. "Next time, try to return without bringing outlaws to our doorstep," Sarah suggested, her voice muffled against his chest. Preston's chuckle rumbled through her. "I'll do my best." The aftermath of the gunfight kept Preston busy well into the night. The wounded were treated by Dr. Wilson, the dead were taken to the undertaker, and the lone survivor was locked securely in the jail. Sarah insisted on staying by Preston's side as his own injury was tended. A bullet grazed along his upper arm that Dr. Wilson assured them would heal cleanly. It was nearly midnight when Preston finally walked Sarah back to the boarding house. Despite Mrs. Holloway's strict rules, she made an exception for the town's hero, inviting him to sit in the parlor while she prepared a late meal for them both. "You've been gone 2 weeks," Sarah said softly as they sat side by side on the settee. "What happened?" Preston sighed, the weariness of his journey evident in every line of his face. "Hollister's gang was more entrenched than we thought, had a whole network of hideouts, took time to track them all down. And then they escaped during transport, ambushed the prison wagon, killed 2 guards. Preston's jaw tightened. "I should have escorted them myself." Sarah placed her hand over his. "You can't be everywhere, Preston." He turned his hand to clasp hers. "When I saw them riding into Snake River, when I thought of you in danger because of me." "Not because of you," Sarah corrected firmly, "because of their own evil choices." Preston's thumb traced circles on her palm. "I've been thinking during those long nights on the trail about us, about the future." Sarah's heart quickened. "And I want to build something here, Sarah. Not just enforce the law, but help create a community worth protecting." He met her gaze directly. I want to do it with you beside me." Before Sarah could respond, Mrs. Holloway returned with a tray of food, effectively ending their private conversation. But the look that passed between them held promise of more to come. The following day, school resumed as normal, though the children were full of excited questions about the gunfight. Sarah redirected their energy toward lessons, but found her own thoughts straying to Preston throughout the day. He arrived to walk her home precisely as school ended, looking more rested and considerably cleaner than the night before. The children swarmed him immediately, peppering him with questions about his adventure. "Did you really shoot 5 outlaws, Marshal?" young Thomas asked, eyes wide. "Certainly not," Preston replied seriously. "It was only 3, and I had plenty of help from the brave men of Snake River." "Miss Reeves says you're a hero," Emily declared. Preston's eyebrows rose as he glanced at Sarah. "Did she now?" Sarah felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Children, it's time for you to head home. Your families will be waiting." Once the children had dispersed, Preston offered Sarah his arm. "A hero, am I? Don't let it go to your head," Sarah advised, slipping her arm through his. "I simply thought it important the children understand the difference between lawful protection and vigilante justice." "A vital distinction," Preston agreed solemnly, though his eyes twinkled. They walked slowly, enjoying the warm afternoon. Preston seemed to be building toward something, his manner more thoughtful than usual. "I've been offered a new position," he said finally. "Territorial Marshal for the entire Western District." Sarah's step faltered. "That would mean leaving Snake River." "It would," Preston confirmed. "Unless I decline the offer." "But surely it's a great honor," Sarah said, trying to keep the dismay from her voice. "An important advancement in your career." "It is." Preston stopped walking, turning to face her. "But there are more important things than advancement." Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest. "Such as?" "Such as putting down roots, building a home." Preston took both her hands in his. "Loving a woman who's brave enough to face down outlaws to protect me." Sarah's breath caught as Preston reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. Here, in the middle of Snake River's Main Street, with townspeople passing by and the afternoon sun warm upon them, he dropped to one knee. "Sarah Reeves," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "I came west seeking purpose and found it in this badge. But I never expected to find the other half of my soul in a woman I first saw bloodied and bound on an auction platform." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond. "Will you marry me, Sarah? Stay here in Snake River with me, build a life together, raise a family in this town we both love." Tears of joy blurred Sarah's vision. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Preston Abernathy, I will marry you." Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet and gathered her into his arms, kissing her thoroughly despite their very public location. Applause erupted from onlookers, and Sarah broke away, laughing and blushing. "I think the whole town knows we're engaged now," she remarked. "Good," Preston said firmly. "Saves us having to make announcements." They were married 3 weeks later in Snake River's small church, with the entire town in attendance. Emily Cooper served as flower girl, sprinkling wildflower petals down the aisle with solemn concentration. Sarah wore a gown of ivory silk that the women of Snake River had helped her create, while Preston cut a handsome figure in a new black suit. As they spoke their vows before Pastor Miller, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From terror and despair on that auction platform to profound joy in the arms of the man who had claimed her not as property, but as someone to cherish and protect. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared. "You may kiss your bride." Preston's kiss was gentle yet filled with promise, sealing their commitment before God and their community. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening. The town had contributed to a feast that rivaled Founders' Day, and dancing continued until the stars were bright overhead. As the night drew to a close, Preston led Sarah to a small but well-built house on the edge of town. "Welcome home, Mrs. Abernathy," he said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Sarah gasped as they entered. The house was fully furnished with a mixture of practical pieces and unexpected luxuries: a proper writing desk, bookshelves already filled with volumes, and in the corner, a rocking chair pulled close to the hearth. "When did you do all this?" she asked, amazed. "I had help," Preston admitted. The town wanted to show their appreciation for their schoolteacher and their marshal. "It's perfect," Sarah whispered, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Preston watched her with naked adoration. "You're perfect," he corrected, drawing her into his arms once more. That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, Sarah knew she had found her true home not in a place, but in the arms of the man who had claimed her at auction with the words, "She's mine to protect." Spring turned to summer, summer to fall, and fall to a winter of contentment for the Abernathys. Sarah continued teaching, while Preston turned down the territorial marshal position in favor of remaining in Snake River. Together, they became central figures in the growing community, respected and loved by those around them. When spring arrived again, Sarah had news of her own to share. On a warm evening, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, she took Preston's hand and placed it gently over her still flat stomach. "I hope you'll be as good with our child as you are with my students," she said softly. Preston's expression transformed from confusion to wonder. "A baby?" "You're certain?" Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. Sarah nodded, her eyes shining. "We'll welcome our child before the first snow of winter." Preston gathered her into his lap, his joy too great for words as he held her close. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, resting her head against his shoulder. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Preston replied, his voice rough with emotion. "When I saw you that day at the auction, bleeding and defiant, I knew you were special, but I never imagined you would become my whole world." "And you, mine," Sarah whispered, sealing the sentiment with a kiss. Their son, James Wilson Abernathy, was born on a crisp November day in 1879, with Martha Wilson assisting at the birth. Preston paced outside until the infant's first cry rang out, then burst into the room to find Sarah exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "He's perfect," Preston breathed, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed to meet his son. "Strong like his mother, and handsome like his father," Sarah added with a tired smile. As James grew from infant to toddler, Snake River grew as well. The railroad finally reached them in 1881, bringing new prosperity and settlers. Preston was unanimously elected as the town's first official mayor, while continuing his duties as marshal. Sarah balanced motherhood with teaching, often carrying James to school with her when he was small, later watching him join her other pupils when he was old enough. Their family expanded again in 1883 with the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth Martha Abernathy, named for both their mothers. Ellie, as she was quickly nicknamed, had her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. On a summer evening in 1888, a decade after they first met, Preston and Sarah sat on their porch watching James and Ellie play in the yard with the family dog. Snake River spread out before them, now a proper town with paved streets, a bank, a hotel, and even a small opera house. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked suddenly. "Staying here instead of accepting that territorial marshal position?" Preston looked at her in surprise. "Not for a single moment." Why do you ask? Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. I was thinking about how different our lives might have been. If you hadn't been in Snake River that day, if you hadn't stepped forward at the auction. Or if you hadn't been brave enough to start a new life in the West, Preston added, understanding her train of thought. Life is full of such moments, turning points that shape our destinies. I'm grateful for ours, Sarah said softly. Preston kissed her temple. As am I, my love, as am I. They remained on the porch until twilight, watching their children play. Secure in the life they had built together from the unlikeliest of beginnings, a bleeding woman on an auction block and the lawman who had claimed her not as property, but as someone to cherish and protect for all the days of their lives.